Arkansas. The Boggy Creek Monster. Mason Carter had no business being in Fouquet, Arkansas. He wasn't a journalist. He wasn't a cryptid chaser with a podcast mic and a half-charged camera. He wasn't even a hunter, though he had a couple of rifles locked away in his garage back home. He was just a contractor from Springfield, Missouri, 42 years old, divorced, with a bad knee, and a truck that rattled whenever he took it past 60. The job should have been straightforward. A real estate investor in Little Rock had called him about inspecting an old hunting cabin in the Sulphur River bottoms. The potential buyer wanted to know if it was worth restoring or if it would be cheaper to knock it down. Mason had done plenty of jobs like this before. Go in, check for water damage, check the foundation, check for pests, write up a report. The guy wired him a retainer and gave him an address scrawled on the back of an envelope. There was a gate code, a brief set of directions, and then, right before hanging up, one last thing. Don't stay after dark. The man's tone was casual, like he was warning Mason about bad cell service. But there'd been something in his voice. A pause, just long enough for Mason to register it, as if those words weren't advice at all, as if they were a plea. He should have asked what the hell that meant. But the money was good, and Mason had bills. He'd been taking whatever jobs came his way lately. Commercial, residential, out of state, didn't matter. The past year hadn't been kind to his business, and saying no to paying work was a luxury he didn't have. So he packed his gear, loaded his tools, and left before dawn. The drive south was long and monotonous miles of interstate, broken up by little towns with one gas station, one diner, and a scattering of houses that looked like they'd been built before his father was born. By the time he passed Texarkana and turned east toward Fouke, the scenery had changed. The air looked different here, thicker somehow. The land flattened out, the trees crowding closer to the road. Fouke itself was small enough that if you blinked, you'd miss it. A few weather-worn buildings clustered around a crossroads, a feed store, a gas station with 2 pumps, a diner with a faded sign that read Millie's Kitchen. Mason pulled in to grab a coffee before heading to the cabin. Inside, the diner smelled like fried catfish and old coffee grounds. A handful of locals sat in booths, their conversations low and unhurried. Mason got his coffee to go and, as he paid, asked the woman at the register how far it was to the address he'd been given. She froze for just a fraction of a second before answering. "That's out near Sulphur Bottom." He nodded, waiting for her to continue. She didn't. She just handed him his change and said, "Road's a mess this time of year. Watch yourself." Back in the truck, Mason sipped the bitter coffee and drove on. The paved road turned to cracked asphalt, then to dirt. The farther he went, the narrower it became, until branches scraped against his windows. Spanish moss dangled low from the trees, swaying in the sluggish breeze like wet strips of cloth. The sun was high, but the canopy was so dense it felt later in the day, shadows pooling across the trail. When the GPS announced he had arrived, Mason almost laughed. There was no sign of a cabin, just trees and undergrowth and a sagging wire fence. He punched in the gate code, and the latch clicked open. Beyond it, the path narrowed further, dipping into a stretch of muck where rainwater had gathered. His truck groaned, but pushed through. The cabin came into view suddenly, as if it had been hiding behind the trees until the last moment. It was a squat, mold-darkened structure built on cinder blocks, leaning ever so slightly to the left, like the ground had shifted beneath it. The roof sagged in the middle, its rusted tin edges curling. 2 steps led up to the warped porch. Mason killed the engine and stepped out. The air hit him like a wall, wet, heavy, and tinged with a faint stench that reminded him of a deer carcass left too long in the summer heat. He found the lockbox beneath the porch steps, exactly where the instructions had said it would be. Inside was a single tarnished key. The door resisted when he tried to open it, the swollen frame sticking until he leaned his shoulder into it. The smell inside was worse. Stale air thick with mildew and dust. The floor was warped in places, and the walls bore the faint stains of past leaks. Cobwebs sagged from the corners. And then he saw the marks. At first, he thought they were scratches from raccoons or stray dogs, but when he crouched to get a better look, his stomach tightened. These were deep gouges carved into the doorframe, not near the floor where an animal might paw, but high above his head. The spaces between them were wide, too wide. Whatever made them had claws the size of carving knives. He told himself it was a bear. It was easier to think that. Pulling his tape measure from his belt, Mason started his inspection. He moved room to room, jotting down notes, roof beams, sagging, signs of rodent droppings, possible termite damage. The place wasn't worth salvaging. He knew it already. He was halfway through measuring the living room when he heard it. A thud. It wasn't the creak of settling wood or the scurry of a small animal. It was heavier, slower. Mason froze, his pencil hovering above his notepad. The sound came again, from deeper inside the cabin. He stepped into the hallway, flashlight in hand, and peered into the shadows. The crooked armchair in the corner was empty. Nothing moved. And then something ran across the roof. The sound was sudden, loud, and wrong. Not the light scamper of a squirrel. This was weight, serious weight. Debris sifted down from the rafters. The cabin groaned under it. Mason's heart kicked into overdrive. He bolted outside, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but he could feel its eyes on him, sharp and unblinking. He swallowed hard and turned back toward the porch. That's when he saw the footprints. They were sunk deep into the mud just beyond the cabin. Huge, three-toed, spaced far apart, each step heavy enough to leave the ground sagging. Mason crouched down, his pulse thudding in his ears. Barefoot. No claw tips like a bear. Something in him said to leave. Get in the truck, turn around, and don't stop until you saw streetlights again. But curiosity was a stubborn thing. He followed the prints into the woods. The trail twisted through undergrowth, across soggy patches where water reflected the dim light filtering through the trees. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. The buzzing insects faded. Even the birds went silent. After what felt like half a mile, he stepped into a clearing and stopped cold.